Ed Cohen, the greatest powerlifter of all time, he had a great saying once: show me someone who's never been injured and I'll show you someone who's never won anything. If you're not training with high enough intensity and then you suddenly increase that intensity or volume massively, I would challenge anyone to know where that line is. And that's why I had a linear improvement for the entire time I was competing.
Because I was talking to Dean. Dean, you're familiar with Dean, right? Dean Garrett.
Dean and I are not particularly close in the sense that we don't really speak, not for any negative reason, just because our lives don't come together. But Dean was one of the guys that was on the scene when I first got into competing. His career preceded mine, but of course he has competed subsequently for a long time. But Dean was one of the guys that was around when I first got into the sport. And he did give a lot of advice to a lot of people at the time. I think the last time I saw Dean in person was at a BNBS show in 2008. No, 2011. 2011 was the last time I've seen Dean in person.
Okay. Of course, Dean is from a different generation too, because I think he's got about maybe 20 or 15 years on you, something like that.
Yeah. Dean was treading the boards long before me. Yeah.
So, but he did mention something, and I thought, wow, okay, this could be a really good topic. Maybe it could help a lot of people out. But he had mentioned that in training, maybe you guys were talking at a show or whatnot, but he said how you brought up that you had once dealt with like terrible tendonitis in your elbow. That's what it was. And barely pick up a bar. I don't know if you remember this. Do you recollect this?
I remember it well. I remember it well because it was right at the start of my career. I had competed in 2008 as a novice. I'd done the Novice Britain. I was British champion, nearly won a pro card. I wasn't quite mature enough yet, but the general consensus was that the next time I competed after that, I was in with a real shout. And I knew that. I'd finished my first year of competing. Life was amazing. I'd entered into this new world of bodybuilding. And then about 3 months into my off season, started getting a lot of elbow pain. And it got to the point where even just opening doors, door handles on cars, picking up light things in a supermarket to get your food shopping, it would just be agony. I basically wasn't able to train at all. Went to see a specialist, was given a pretty bleak prognosis. They looked at X-rays and MRIs. They effectively said, look, your training's caused a lot of damage. You'll need to modify your training. Otherwise, you'll have serious problems. So I was only 25, 26 years old at the time. So this was absolutely devastating news for me. So I didn't tell anyone about it for a while. Continued to come into the gym and just train legs because I thought I'll rest it for a few months. Resting didn't offer a solution at all. The pain was still there. It was actually Vicky McCann who subsequently went on to be a really good training partner of mine. She's a close personal friend, but she's probably the only person I would class as being like a real training partner of mine. We trained together for about 7 or 8 years. It was actually Vicky that just had a word with me and said, look, I think you should just start training again. You're not moving forward. You're miserable. You love bodybuilding. Why don't you just give it a go? So that's what I did. And it was a bit painful to begin with, but slowly but surely as the weeks went on, the pain subsided because obviously I was getting a lot of blood flow through the joints, through the tendons. To use a sort of like colloquial term, I just blew the rust away, blew the cobwebs away. And before I knew it, the pain had subsided. Back training again. And the improvements I made in about the first 3 or 4 months when I was back in the gym were incredible. The next time I competed after that, which was 2010, I turned pro. It was interesting because everyone is afraid to be injured. Now, I'm not saying that being injured is a good thing. But what I am saying is that expect to be injured or expect to have pain. Expect to have overuse injuries because our sport is one of overuse. And what I realised was there's probably not a joint in my body that is completely pain-free. That doesn't mean I class myself as being injured. I don't want people to get the wrong idea. But I've got 20 years of hard training under my belt, and I can still train as hard as I could 20 years ago. It takes a bit more warming up. It takes a bit more forethought. But ultimately, you're going to pick up injuries. You're going to pick up overuse injuries. Sometimes you just need to accept that it's not the end of the world. Now, I'm not saying if you've torn a muscle clean off the bone, that's a different story. But I guess the simple message is don't create a bit of paralysis for yourself by just continually trying to avoid injury, because if you want to get anywhere in the sport, you're going to have to deal with it. And Ed Cohen, the greatest powerlifter of all time, he had a great saying once, and he always said, show me someone who's never been injured and I'll show you someone who's never won anything. And I couldn't agree more. Now, you can be sensible. I'm not saying that I couldn't have avoided some of the injuries I've had over the years, but largely speaking, I think what I did, how I approached the sport, wasn't perfect, but it was less imperfect than what the majority of people do. And that's why I had a linear improvement for the entire time I was competing.
There's a lot of value in that message. It's so interesting that you said how if you're not willing to push the boundary, here, I'm going to maybe put it in a different way that I think can add value. If you're not willing to push the boundary, take a risk, and that's what's required to compete, and you've turned it into a sport, essentially, the training part, because you're constantly chasing a progression, right? I think everybody who's listening has picked up some sort of complaint, an ache, just something that's nagging them, and maybe a full-on injuries, right? And then you learn from it, and maybe you try to adjust it for next time and think, oh, next time I won't do it like that. Maybe if I do it like this, it'll be even better for me, kind of thing.
No, I think that's exactly it. I think we learn through our mistakes much more so than our successes. You talked about training and it being a sport, and it is. And bodybuilding is a sport, you know, by nature and by design, it's a sport of progressive overload that your body adapts to a stress it's unacquainted with. Now, in an ideal world, we find that fine line between pushing enough to create that adaptive response, but not too much that you get an injury. I would challenge anyone to know where that line is.
Yes, exactly.
So
well said, man.
The only thing I could say is that if you've never been injured, cited the Ed Cohn quote, if you've never been injured, you're not training hard enough. Simple as that. And if you're chronically injured all of the time, wrong with your planning or your approach. Marry the two, you're going to find that for the majority of the time you're able to train hard, heavy and intense, but you're going to experience a bit of pain with it. But it's not going to be debilitating. That's how I've always approached it.
No, there's a lot to learn from that. You have to know where the two ends are and then find...
It's a sweet spot. Yeah. It's a sweet spot in the middle where you're training hard, you're progressing, and you're not experiencing too many negatives. And I think anyone that's training for long enough has had spells where their training is just going really, really well and they're lifting well, their body feels good. Inevitably, that has to come to an end because it's during those times that you're pushing even harder. So then you hit that ceiling where like your body just suffers a little bit. It's like, oh, well, you know, now my back's sore again. The holistic approach I took to it is the key is you don't, just because you experiencing pain again, that doesn't mean that you totally back off. And it doesn't mean that what you're doing wasn't right. It just means that you need to manage that probably only for a spell of maybe 1 to 2 weeks and it'll settle and then you go again. That's how I've approached it. It's not rocket science. It really isn't.
What would you say for someone who's maybe a little bit newer to this, where they really want to push hard and they want to progress well, but they're not sure? It's like, well, how do you know that fine line of this is something I can really push through or this is something I should adjust and modify? What's been your experience with that? You're in the middle of an exercise and you're like, ooh, yeah, I never felt that the reps prior. What would you say is the point where you know, okay, I'm going to push through this versus I'm going to back off today and maybe adjust it or change the exercise?
I'll use a very simplistic overview and then I'll dig a little deeper. But first of all, I would say if the pain eases, the more you warm up, you're good to go. If the pain worsens, the more you warm up, avoid it. Yeah. The second is that you need to also then differentiate. I'm experiencing muscular pain, as in I have a muscular injury, or am I experiencing tendinoses, which is an inflammation of the tendons, which you can train through. You can train through that because once the tendons lubricate and the blood starts moving, the pain will ease off. I just said, if you warm up more and the pain eases, you're okay. Now, the best long-term strategy because you're just going to go around in circles, but it'll get you through the session. If it's muscular and you have a muscular injury, forget it. You need to let that heal. You can't train through a tear. Simple as that. Generally speaking, I kind of like instinctively know that if I'm warming up and something hurts, inevitably, something will hurt. As long as it starts to subside, the more sets I do, I know I'm fine. I know I'm absolutely fine.
Can you think back to like a training session, maybe more recent, that you've had something similar to that where you, or is that
all the time?
Regular? Oh, all the time. Yeah.
All the time, Kenny, all the time. And this isn't exclusive to me. Anyone who's been at the top of the game in any sport, you're not going to feel like what you did when you were 21. Things are going to be stiff. Things are going to be tight. You're going to have a bit of pain. And there are degrees of that. So recently, for example, I've been experiencing a bit of patellar tendonitis. So a bit of pain in the knee. I basically tried to push through it. It was worsening. I wasn't really enjoying leg training anymore, which is a shame because it's one of my favorite workouts. So I just, for a few weeks, I just backed off the load, slowed the rep tempo down so that basically it's a common sense approach, isn't it? If it wasn't hurting, I wasn't hurting it. That was my experience. And lo and behold, a few weeks have passed. My knees feel better. Simple as that. You auto-regulate. People use this term all the time, auto-regulation. To me, it's just use your common sense. If something's agony, don't make it any worse and then expect it to be better the next week. So generally speaking, that's how I would approach it. I would just use a bit of sense. If it was something more serious than that, then I'd maybe look at sourcing outside help like physio or go and see a doctor or something about it. But fortunately, touch wood, I've had very few serious injuries. In fact, I've virtually had no serious injuries in my whole career. Your body's very durable and it will adapt. It will adapt to the stress you put on it. What I'm trying to do here, Kenny, is that everything I say, I try and make it digestible for people so that I'm not overcomplicating anything for anyone. And hopefully they can tap into that in their own training and say, you know what, he's right, actually. I've had that experience or I haven't tried that, let's go for it. Because by and large, very few people are at risk of overtraining and very few people train too hard. Mm-hmm. Most of the time, people don't train hard enough.
And also, I think there's another category of people who, and this is just about learning how to train, I think, but there's a category of people, and maybe they're very new to this, and this is for you guys, but maybe you're getting hurt, you're not even training hard, and it's because you're just not doing things in the right way for your body.
Yeah, I mean, that's a planning issue or an exercise selection issue. Right. Not everyone is biomechanically suited to particular movements. And also what I would say as a caveat what I said with regards to training intensity to make this point, that if you're not training with high enough intensity and then you suddenly increase that intensity or volume massively straight away, you might experience some adverse results. But if you were to increase your intensity incrementally for maybe 3 or 4 weeks, you would find that your body would probably adapt that quickly. It really would.
This is one that came to mind here with soreness. Do you get sore more, like actual DOMs?
DOMs, yeah, of course, yeah. Not excessive when I'm training all the time. Put it this way, it varies body part to body part. Do I get sore biceps after a bicep workout? Very rarely, very rarely. Do I get sore triceps after a tricep workout? Yeah, sometimes, right in the belly of the long head. Do I get sore legs after a leg workout? You bet. Leg DOMs are a thing. Leg DOMs will be the bane of anyone's life forever and a day, and you cannot avoid that. Same with back. If you're doing some heavy deadlifts, your erectors will be fried for a few days. So it's body part specific, but the DOMs I have, I don't know how hard I train, they're not that bad. A couple of days. These off, but that varies person to person. I've got friends of mine who do experience bad DOMs, and that's just individual to them. And I've got friends who never get sore. It's individual variances, and you have to work that into your own plan. If I miss a leg workout, even for 1 or 2 weeks, the DOMs are significantly worse when I come back, even after 1 or 2 weeks off. So there's a message there, Kenny. You either never train legs ever, or you train them every week. There's no in between.
Like, let's say you're on your regular schedule, you're doing your thing, you're progressing, and DOMs is lasting a little longer than usual. I don't know if that happens to you, because you strike me as the guy who's got everything on point, right? With the nutrition, the training.
Yeah, well, I think what you're asking me is, do I push through DOMs? Like, for example, do I train the same body part intensely, but still a bit sore? Sometimes an overlap between lower back fatigue and then from a back workout, and then when I go and train legs, if I'm squatting, I might still have a bit of lower back tightness. Other than that, the way my routine is planned out and the way I've adapted it over the years, I pretty much never have DOMs in a particular body part by the time I train it again. So that doesn't really answer your question as to what my experiences are of training through DOMs, because I don't really ever have to do it. There will be residual fatigue in my body, but it's not acute. I'm warming up thinking, I'm doing chest today and my chest is still sore. I never experienced that.
That's probably better versus people pushing through DOMs, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a specific paper to quote, but generally speaking, I've heard a lot of people talk, and they say that the science dictates that just because a muscle's sore, it doesn't mean that it cannot be trained. But the anecdotal evidence would suggest that you'll have a better workout if your muscles are not sore. It's obvious,
Well, I don't know if you've tried this. This is things you do when you're maybe a little bit more inexperienced, but where let's say it is a chest workout and your chest is still sore, nothing's progressing that day. There's no progression happening because I physically can't. And I go in there with the motivation because maybe you're just unaware, but yeah, there's nothing actually moving upwards. So then I think, okay, this is not productive, right?
No. And I mean, there are also be slightly dangerous. Dangerous is perhaps an extreme word, but anyway, I've used it. So for example, if I have extremely fatigued legs, and I still have a lot of DOMs in my legs and my hamstrings and my glutes, and then I try and deadlift, stress will go straight into your lower back because your legs are not firing the same. Repeatedly do that, then the stress through your lower back add up over the weeks, and you'll hurt yourself. So that's an example whereby if that's happening, either your leg workout back a day or put your back workout back a day, and or look at your leg workout and perhaps reduce volume. But I think you can work around that by planning. The reason why I bring this up is that I see a lot of guys who are training and they're deadlifting on a Thursday and then they're doing their legs on a Friday or a Saturday, and I'm like, that's just poor planning. Common sense dictates you cannot possibly maximize the load in either workout and expect to have a good workout. Like you say, you just said it yourself, it's not going to be productive and it's not going to be progressive. And that is your goal, progressive overload. Don't forget that.
I wonder if some of these guys that are preaching that maybe, or doing that, maybe they're younger, maybe their recovery demands are completely different, or maybe they're not doing the progression thing properly. I don't know. I
suspect it's a combination of a lot of factors, but I don't criticize some new guys for trying some wacky plans because I used to do it back in the day, but I've realized over time that what I did works. It works for me. I can only speak for me. But as I said before, I'm not arrogant enough to say I am right. But what I would say is I think perfect, but it's less imperfect than the majority of sort of like training plans I see. And the proof is in the pudding, as they say. I didn't start out like this. I wasn't a pro world champion back in 2008. I was just a young kid with a glint in his eye. He was hungry and he loved bodybuilding, and I had to work to the top. So you have to believe in your own approach, and I think it's justified. I think the bodybuilding community does know who the best natural bodybuilders are, but
there you go.
This is the problem. This is the problem.
That's a problem.
Yeah.
So
if anyone is out there and they get pissed off at me saying that, I still think the greatest natural bodybuilder of all time